for the benefit of tariff-free trade, having to accept unlimited free movement of people. We find ourselves prohibited from making our own deals with the rest of the world. And for all of this, and for a trade deficit in excess of £60 billion a year, we pay a membership fee. And this point, by the way, is not contentious. Our net membership fee is £34 million a day. The benefits of not having those now relatively tiny tariffs are far outweighed by our current costs being part of this single market. But of course, the real agenda isn't about the economy. The real agenda is political. We are members of a political union. European law is supreme. The European Court of Justice overrules our Parliament and our courts. And yes, and this is the last time in this campaign I'm going to do this, but we don't even have a British passport anymore. All right, we've got a European Union one, which of course is available for up to 508 million people. And let's stop pretending what this European project is. They have an anthem. They're building an army. They've already got their own police force. And of course, they've got a flag. And at the end of the day tomorrow, when people vote, they must make a decision. Which flag is theirs? And I want us to live under British passports and under the British flag. I tell you something, if this referendum tomorrow was about joining the European Union, given those costs that I've outlined, I think we would overwhelmingly reject it. So who are those supporting our continued membership of the Union? Who are the Remain side? Well, some are the dreamers, generally of an older political generation, people who believed in the European project from day one, people like Lord Heseltine, who still very unapologetically says he looks forward to the day when Britain joins the euro. But they in reality are very few in number. Now, the Remain side really is about the vested interests, the big corporate businesses who for the first time in history are able, through the European Commission, to effectively write the rules for their own businesses to the detriment of their small and medium-sized competitors. And of course, there's almost an entire political and bureaucratic class in favour of all of this. After all, there are 10,000 people working for the European institutions in Brussels who earn more than David Cameron. If you're part of that set, what's not to like? And then, of course, there's Mr. Cameron. He's a Remainer. And incidentally, I don't know whether anybody can tell me where the leader of Britain Stronger in Europe is. I haven't seen Lord Rose now for some weeks. Perhaps he was just simply too honest when he told the Parliamentary Select Committee that if we left the European Union, that workers' wages in Britain would go up. Mr. Cameron wants you to remain. He told you he was going to get a great deal for this country. He got very little. He came back insisting that it's legally enforceable. It is not. And I expect that if we were to side with Mr. Cameron tomorrow, the European Parliament would begin unpicking that deal before the summer recess. And today he makes yet another, frankly, dishonest pitch to the public when he tells us that if we vote to remain, we're voting for further reform. Mrs. Thatcher, at the height of her powers, was incapable of reforming the political direction of the European Union. Tony Blair, who said at the start of his 6 months presidency of the EU that he would turn the Union around, failed completely to do it and surrendered much of our rebate. The word reform in Brussels, ladies and gentlemen, means something different. It means a greater, deeper drive towards centralisation, a deeper commitment to fulfilling the dreams of the original founders, the fulfilment of a United States of Europe. That is what it's all about. So this referendum is actually quite simple. This referendum is the people versus the establishment. And one of the enduring images that I shall keep from this referendum is when I tried to give Britain's ailing fishing industry the opportunity to give voice to what has happened to their communities by taking their small flotilla up the Thames. And I thought the sight of a multi-millionaire former rock star shouting abuse, making a variety of hand gestures, some of which got published in the papers and some didn't, and not directed just at me, that would have been okay, but directed at our fishermen. That image for me says it all. That actually it's the vested interest, it's the rich, it's big business, it's those who are doing very nicely, thank you, against pretty much everybody else. We can do better than this. Tomorrow we can vote for real change. Tomorrow we can vote to put power back in the hands of people. We can vote to take control of our country back. We can vote to get our borders back. We can vote to get our pride and self-respect as a nation and in who we are as a people back. I want us tomorrow to vote for Britain to become independent. I want us to vote for us to become democratic. I want us to vote for us to become a normal country, because normal countries make their own laws. Normal countries are in charge of their destiny and their future. If you've never voted before because you think voting won't change anything, then tomorrow is your opportunity to make a difference. Go out and do it. Vote with your heart. Vote with your soul. Vote with pride in this country and its people. And together we can make tomorrow our Independence Day, a big day in our national history, a day that is good for us and a day that is good for the rest of Europe too, because other nations will follow us. I believe the passion and commitment is on our side of the argument. I believe that most of our voters would crawl over broken glass to get down to that polling station tomorrow. But we need the others. We need the people who agree on the street or in the pub or in the cafe. We need them, the non-voters, to go out and vote for their country tomorrow. I'm optimistic that they're going to do it. It may be tight, it may be narrow, but I genuinely believe we are going to win this. Thank you.
Well, a passionate speech there from Nigel Farage, urging voters to vote with their heart, soul and pride in the country and the people when they go to the ballot boxes tomorrow. He's going to take some questions from the floor. I think in the meantime we're going to take a short break here on Sky News. Welcome back. We're in the thick of the last day of campaigning before the country votes whether to stay in or leave the European Union. Well, the leaders of both camps have been speaking this morning in last-ditch attempts to catch a few more votes.
Please give it everything you've got in these last hours to make sure that people go out and vote tomorrow. Go out and vote Remain. Go out and vote Remain for a bigger, better Britain inside a reformed European Union. Stronger, safer, better off. A day to go. Let's do it. Thank you very much.
It's our last chance to sort this out and take back control. If we don't vote to leave tomorrow, we'll remain locked in the back of the car, driven in an uncertain direction, frankly, to a place we don't want to go, and perhaps by a driver who doesn't speak the very best of English, if you see what I mean. And this is our chance to sort it out.
Well, if there is one slogan from the EU campaign that has been repeated, it surely must be take back control by vote leave. The natural question that follows is take back what control and from whom? Well, the answer most succinctly is sovereignty. But what do we really mean by that? Our Foreign Affairs editor Sam Kiley examines that now in this special report.
50 miles east of here lies the coast of Europe, an entity that's been generating rules and regulations for decades. Laws that, in the view of its critics, has been stripping away British sovereignty. Back in 1974, the great British jurist Lord Denning said that it was a rising tide that flowed into our estuaries and up our rivers and couldn't be held back, getting us mired in a quagmire of legislation over which we have no control. But does this loss of sovereignty matter? And is it even really happening? A street party in the East End of London to celebrate the Queen's 90th birthday.
Come on! Let the old people out here, come on!
Perhaps no better place to explore the nature of British sovereignty.
It's the Queen and the ruling of the Queen, like, you know. That's always been the way of the Englishman, isn't it, like, you know. So,
Do you think that we have lost sovereignty to Brussels?
no, not sovereignty. She never really did the rules, did she, like, you know. She just faces the rules, or is the headpiece, the government.
I would really like, personally, to leave Europe so that we can at least try to get some of our English/Britishness back.
But she did confess to having recently bought a flat in Barcelona. It seems that people were confusing sovereignty with patriotism. It's complicated. The whole idea of sovereignty has taken centuries to evolve. Many would argue that sovereignty ultimately rests with Parliament, but it wasn't always that way. Back in 1215, King John was forced to meet his barons here at Runnymede. They'd beaten him out of his capital in London and they made him sign the Magna Carta. Now that established the freedom of the individual under the law. In a sense, it was writing the DNA code for democracy, and that ultimately has led to this idea of parliamentary sovereignty. As the wheels of history turned, this power meandered erratically, but always towards Parliament. It was then entrenched with violence, with Oliver Cromwell's victory in the English Civil War and the regicide of King Charles I in the 17th century. Parliament's power, and therefore its sovereignty, grew further with the Acts that joined Scotland to England. And with the 1707 Union of Parliaments, a new nation was born, Great Britain. Now, arguably, it wasn't until the 19th century, with the advent of universal male suffrage, and then in the early 20th century, when the Brits came up with the then amazing idea that women should have the vote, that real legitimate sovereignty was concentrated in these buildings behind me. After World War II, the British Empire went into terminal decline, and the tapestry of imperial commerce and defence was replaced with a network of new multilateral relationships that pin together a patchwork quilt of international law. All of it technically erodes national sovereignty. Robin Niblett is an expert in international relations, and he explained that sovereignty is and always has been a flexible thing.
The United Kingdom at the moment has the advantage that it's decided that it's well served by being in loads of organisations. We are the most networked organisation of all. We're in the G20, the G7, permanent member of the UN Security Council and the EU. And the question is the UK getting things out of its EU membership that it cannot get through the others? The main economic organisation in which we're in, where we have some influence, one of the biggest of 28 member states, is the EU. You're not going to get that clout economically in the global economic system in the G20, where we're a relatively small player next to China and the United States. You're not going to get it in the UN, where, okay, we might be a permanent member of the UN Security Council, but again, we're overshadowed really by the big boys.
World attention centers on Washington, as in the State Auditorium, representatives of 12 nations of Western Europe and North America assemble for the signing of the North Atlantic Treaty.
Perhaps the greatest loss of sovereignty for the British Parliament is the right to declare war. Britain joined NATO in 1949. Since then, the country has had to make war on the Three Musketeers principle, all for one and one for all. Already Russia has invaded Ukraine. If it went on to attack a NATO member like Latvia, in or out of the European Union, we would have to go to war.
If Britain leaves the EU, it will be detrimental to European security. I think there's no way of sugarcoating that particular pill. The EU is already vulnerable because of the difficulties of the Eurozone crisis, and because Russia sees the EU, as much as NATO, maybe more than NATO, as a threat to its sovereignty and its control, because it's about rule of law, it's about democracy, and these are things that can be threatening to Vladimir Putin's system of government. So for the United Kingdom to pull out is to weaken the EU as its bargaining power, as its political credibility. Very importantly, of course, it also weakens UK sovereignty, because its ability to negotiate with Vladimir Putin on sanctions or whatever, which is the main tool we're using with Vladimir Putin now, is economic sanctions. Your negotiating power is that much weaker. And this is at the heart of sovereignty. Sovereignty is about outcomes. Sovereignty isn't something you hoard or you possess. It's up to governments to decide how much do I keep to myself and how much do I deploy with others to be able to achieve my objectives.
Of course, everyone knows, or should know, that citizens of the European Union member states do have democratic representation to Brussels, through the Council of Ministers and through the directly elected European Parliament in Strasbourg. But perhaps the one area least understood is the European Court of Justice.
There's one place that really winds up those who believe that sovereignty in the United Kingdom has been eroded by the faceless bureaucrats of the European Union. It's this place, the European Court of Justice. And by coincidence today, the European Commission is bringing a case against the British government to try to block them from preventing immigrants from claiming benefit for their children and other welfare payments. And there's no escaping the fact that if you've got 28 different nations and 28 legal systems, loads of lawyers all squabbling about what different bits of legislation means, you're going to need a referee, and that is what this place is.
To many, the ECJ has become a law factory, just as Lord Denning warned. It generates 1.1 million pages of legal documents in 24 languages every year. It employs 625 lawyer linguists, 75 full-time and 200 freelance interpreters.
In case C-308-14, European Commission, against the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, the Court First Chamber hereby 1. Dismisses the action, 2. Orders the European Commission to pay the costs.
So there we've had the European Court of Justice actually strike a blow for British sovereignty against the European Commission. Not only that, but costs were awarded to the British and against the Commission.
Eleanor Sharpson's got a black belt in karate, useful perhaps for smashing her way through the EU's legal system.
It's wrong to think of it as a single snapshot in time. It isn't. It's an evolving pattern. You have legislation. You have a ruling by this court on the meaning of a particular piece of legislation. That will be against the background of discussions that are ongoing in Brussels, and this is not the Brussels bureaucracy reaching out. It will be a committee in which representatives of all the member states are sitting. Then the court makes a decision. Now, if the member states are content with that decision, that's fine, that stands. If they feel that the law, the legislative text, needs adjusting, they have the power to do it. You don't have to leave the EU to adjust the text.
Many here now argue that the sovereignty of Parliament has been eroded too far.
Well, sovereignty should lie in this country with Parliament. That is where it has lain in the past. The problem is that we're now in a muddle, and people talk about pooling sovereignty. So they talk about Europe somehow, the top table at Europe, being a place where we share sovereignty. The question is whether sovereignty can really be shared, and particularly the sovereignty of Parliament, which, after all, is a democratic institution in a way that the European Union perhaps is not.
But one could argue that parliamentarians themselves have been giving away sovereignty to Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales as part of devolution. So what is the problem? Are MPs just after more power? Sovereignty of them over us? I asked an old friend, a former legal advisor in Whitehall, Martin Thomas.
It is the case that when we joined the EU, we were giving up our sovereignty, that is to say, our ability to act alone on all of the issues that were laid down in the then EU treaty. What we decided is that those things would be dealt with, that means legislated, that means a law would be made about them, at the EU level and not at the British level. It seems to be the case that the most prominent voices arguing that we should leave so that we should take back control are voices belonging to parliamentarians who would like to have that level of control.
It now seems that the very idea of sovereignty is slippery. It's a contract between us, our government, and through it to the rest of the world.
So we're pretty much up to our necks in agreements with international organisations that have taken away our sovereignty. The United Nations, the World Bank, the IMF, NATO. But we still got our pints, and there'll always be an England. Cheers.
So where are we when it comes to what the polls are saying? Well, Sky's data analyst Harry Carr is here in the studio. Let's take a look at our Sky News poll of polls. This takes an average of the latest surveys from all the major polling companies, and as you can see, it is very close. 44% for in, 45% for out. 11, though, don't know, and they're key, aren't they, Harry?
Well, yeah, we don't know yet what they're actually going to do. So there's a question whether there's going to be a status quo swing at the end. There is an argument that people are more risk averse. When they get into that polling booth, they're going to think, do I really want to change? Is it really that bad as it stands? Are we going to do that?
I mean, but what is the evidence? If you don't know at this stage, are you just not going to vote? Or are you going to go and vote and be cautious? Or go and vote and be bold?
So there's no evidence that suggests that don't knows are less likely to vote than other people. It does suggest that, frankly, we don't know. We don't know how it's actually going to go. If 10% of people still actually really don't know how they're going to vote, how are we supposed to know yet? It's possible that it could be a big Remain, a big Leave win. It looks like it's going to be close, though.
Well, let's look at how the polls have gone over the course of the campaign, and we can see that in marked in yellow, on the yellow line along the top, have been in the lead throughout the campaign until last week, where they crossed over. What do you think caused that, Harry?
So what was going on through all of this was phone polls were clearly showing Remain leads all the way through it, sometimes as large as 18-point leads. That was true right up until last week, when Ipsos Mori and Comres and ICM all showed that suddenly there was a big swing away from Remain towards Leave. That's partially methodological changes. They were previously not really taking into account education in the same way as internet polls were, but it does also seem to be a real swing towards the Leave campaign.
What's also interesting is what people tell the pollsters when they're asked. And let's look at the next graphic, because this shows us the difference between the YouGov and the Survation polls. Now, the Survation ones were carried out on the phone, the YouGov ones were carried out online. And they get different results, don't they? More people say in when you speak to them on the phone, fewer say it, though, when they're just sort of doing it more semi-anonymously on a computer.
That was more the case than this shows earlier in the campaign. It's actually narrowed dramatically, but it depends on which ones you look at. So ORB recently had their final poll out, and they say that it's actually going to be a nearly 10-point win for Remain. The same was true for BMG. They showed an online poll which had Leave well ahead, and a telephone poll which showed a Remain. On the other hand, ICM showed both of them with a -5, with a 5-point lead for the Leave campaign. It's really difficult to tell what's going on, but the final polls do look like it's actually a swing towards Leave for telephone polls.
OK, Harry, thanks very much. Well, one man who hopes that the polls will be moving towards Leave is Leave campaigner Nigel Farage, who joins us now from Westminster. Good to talk to you, Mr Farage. You've just given a very passionate speech asking people to get out and vote for Leave tomorrow. Do you think you've done enough throughout this campaign?
I think a lot of people have, yes. I mean, in my case, of course, it's been going on for over 20 years, so I like to think I've done my best. Look, at the end of the day, we've heard the arguments. It's now about people's passion. It's now about whether they go out to vote or not. And so my plea is to people who don't normally vote, because they don't think voting changes anything. And my message to them is this is one vote that really will change things. So go out, vote for your country, vote with your heart, and do it.
OK, so we vote Leave on Thursday. What happens on Friday? How do we change immigration on Friday if we get a vote Leave on Thursday?
Well, we're not going to change everything the next morning. We're not going to wake up to a world that has been transformed overnight. We will still be members of the European Union on Friday morning, and we will have to enter into, relatively swiftly, a negotiation process that gets us out of political union but keeps us as good friends and trading neighbours.
How do you think you're going to be able to do that, though? How do you think you're going to be able to quickly negotiate some kind of controls over our borders, over immigration, and at the same time keep that happy trading relationship?
Well, in terms of trade, we've got a big voice today from the German car industry representing workers, saying, for goodness sake, if the UK votes to leave, please, please keep a tariff-free deal, otherwise a lot of German people would lose their jobs. So even before the result, we're getting some common sense from the German car lobby.
Lined up to say they don't want you to leave.
What about this referendum? No, of course they don't want us to leave. We are the second biggest contributor, so the Germans are very keen to keep us there. But as I say, the German car lobby is all-powerful. There is a general election coming up in Germany next year, and it's good to hear those voices of common sense. The whole point about this referendum is who makes the big decisions. And if we vote to leave, we are in charge, and our government and our MPs will be directly accountable to us at each election over issues like immigration numbers once we're fully back in control.
When you think about who makes the big decisions, who makes the laws that affect people in the UK, of course all the laws in the UK are passed by the House of Lords, an unelected body. I'm just wondering why you've not campaigned to change the House of Lords, why you think the answer lies in Europe, not a little closer to home.
Oh, please. Look, once we've left the European Union and we are a self-governing, independent, democratic nation, I would like to see fundamental reforms in this country. Firstly, to the voting system. Secondly, to the upper chamber. But let's just deal with one big battle at a time.
You just briefly, the last question to you, Mr Farage, because we're running out of time, but in your speech you talked about it being people versus the establishment tomorrow, and this is something we've heard a lot from you throughout the campaign. Think about yourself, somebody who was privately educated, somebody who worked in the city, someone who's a politician. Aren't you part of the establishment?
Well, I might have been in politics a long time, but I don't regard myself as a politician, and I'm certainly not a career politician. I opted to do this because I felt this was the most important political question we would face in our lifetimes. And it's not about where you come from, it's about where you're going to. And I've done my utmost over many years to go out and meet as many decent people out there around this country. And I feel and believe that they've lost faith in the political class. They think too much has been given away, and tomorrow is their big chance to take back control of their lives.
Mr Farage, thanks very much for joining us. Nigel Farage there from Vote Leave. Of course, lots more to come here on Sky News.
I'm Hannah Stott with your latest showbiz news. A warning, some flash photography may be coming up. Just days after 49 people were slain and 53 injured during the mass shooting at a nightclub in Orlando, Broadway's brightest stars have got together to record the Burt Bacharach and Hal David hit song, What the World Needs Now Is Love. I'm Hannah Stott with your latest showbiz news. A warning, some flash photography, Goldberg, Carole King and Kristen Bell are among the many voices behind the new recording. All proceeds from the sale of digital downloads of the track will benefit the LGBT Centre of Central Florida. On the brink of this weekend's release of the sequel Independence Day Resurgence, director Roland Emmerich has been honoured with a hand and footprint ceremony in the forecourt of the TCL Chinese Theatre in Hollywood. Almost all of the principal cast members from the new film was in attendance for the event celebrating Emmerich.
And I was a film student, and I came down here to the Mann Chinese Theatre because I wanted to see it. And I remember when I walked here around, there were all these, you know, hands and feet of all these screen legends, you know, and I can just not believe that I'm one of them now.
The German film director has had huge Hollywood success with films such as Stargate, The Day After Tomorrow and Independence Day. Canadian R&B singer Drake has held on to the top spot of the weekly US Billboard 200 album chart for a 7th consecutive week, becoming the first male artist in more than a decade to achieve the feat, according to Billboard. Drake's album Views sold another 121,000 units for the week ending June the 16th. Billboard said the last male artist to stay at the top of the album chart that long was rapper Eminem. And an auction house is expecting a lock of David Bowie's hair to fetch more than $4,000 this weekend. Heritage Auctions says Bowie's hair will go on the block on June the 25th as part of the auction in Beverly Hills, California. It says the lot comes from a former employee at Madame Tussauds Wax Museum in London. She snipped some of his hair in the 1980s to create a wig for a wax figure of the singer.
TD Direct Investing International sponsors the Sky News Financial Report. TD Direct Investing International sponsors the Sky News Financial Report.
Business update now, and the Remain camp has received its biggest business backing to date, as more than 1,200 business leaders, including 51 FTSE 100 bosses, have warned that leaving the EU would mean uncertainty, less trade and fewer jobs. Well, in an open letter to The Times, it was organised by the Remain campaign, they say setting terms of trade from scratch would hurt not just the big exporters, but hundreds of thousands of smaller firms too. Well, back in February, the Remain camp had 36 FTSE leaders supporting it. Well, as night follows day, in response, we've had Vote Leave Chief Executive Matthew Elliott, who says this was simply re-releasing a summary of voices we've already heard from. We know that big businesses feel the benefit of EU membership, but British people suffer the consequences of uncontrolled migration, with unsustainable pressure on public services, downward pressure on wages, and an erosion in working conditions. Well, in our special series examining the impact of a Brexit on various industries, today we are looking at the financial sector, and Professor Murad Chowdhury, is former chief executive of Habib Bank, joins me now. Professor Chowdhury, this letter says less trade, less investment, fewer jobs. That's what 1,200 business leaders have to say. What say you?
The letter today is accurate insofar as there will be uncertainty. There always is. That's why markets are volatile recently, or have been more volatile recently. But once one gets beyond that and things sort themselves out, then there are certain facts on the ground in the City of London that will reassert themselves, the infrastructure, the expertise. So I wouldn't necessarily agree that it means forever fewer jobs and less trade. As long as one makes goods and services, one produces goods and services that other people want to buy, then one will be able to sell them. That's why certain countries outside of the EU do very well exporting to the EU, and certain countries inside the EU, primarily in the southern Eurozone, don't really benefit from being in the EU because they don't produce goods and services that other people want. So that was it was understandable that they would say this. But again, Alistair Osborne in the Times today said, why should anyone really take too much notice of what a group of rich businessmen are saying? There will be uncertainty, but that's a short-term thing. It's not something that would affect the UK for the next 10, 20, 30 years.
But if the counter-argument is it might not be that bad, that's not really a compelling reason, is it, to withdraw from the EU?
No, I wouldn't suggest it is. I mean, I wouldn't suggest it's a reason to withdraw simply because it might not be that bad. The reason to leave the EU, one should vote out if one thinks the sovereignty and the democracy principles are paramount to the UK. This is a long-term decision. I don't think the reason to vote in or out should be because of an instant hit to any industry, whether it's the tourism industry or the City of London or anything like that. It should be taken on the point of principle of what you want the UK to be looking like in 50 years' time. What sort of control and sovereignty and democracy issues are important to you? I don't think anyone would vote in or out simply because it was either okay or not okay. The uncertainty thing is there because we don't know what it'll look like. There will be renegotiation required. But that's true even when we're in the EU.
together, every day together, always. I really feel that I'm losing my best friend. I can't believe this could be the end. It looks as though you're letting go, and if it's real, I don't want to know. Don't speak, I know just what you're seeing, so please stop explaining. Don't tell me 'cause it hurts. Don't speak, I know what you're thinking, and I don't need your reasons. Don't tell me 'cause it hurts. Our memories, well, they can be inviting, but somewhere all together might need frightening. As we die, boom, you and I, with my head in my hands, I see them cry. Don't speak, you know just what you're seeing, so please stop explaining. Don't tell me 'cause it hurts. No, 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 don't speak. I know what you're thinking, and I don't need your reasons. Don't tell me 'cause it hurts. It's all ending, I gotta stop pretending.
Flanked by the former Prime Minister John Major and Labour's Harriet Harman. He's urged people to vote for remaining in the European Union. Vote Leave's Brexit campaigner Boris Johnson visited the famous Billingsgate fish market to declare tomorrow's referendum as our last chance to take back control. We're going to be hearing more from Mr Johnson shortly, but first let's catch up with our political editor Faisal Islam, who's standing by for us, travelling with the Prime Minister today. And what's he had to say for himself, Faisal?
You and me, we used to be together, every day together, always. I really feel that I'm losing my best friend. I can't believe this could be the end. It looks as though you're letting go, and if it's real, I don't want to know. Don't speak, I know just what you're seeing, so please stop explaining. Don't tell me 'cause it hurts. Don't speak, I know what you're thinking, and I don't need your reasons. Don't tell me 'cause it hurts. Our memories, can see us dying, are we? Don't speak, I know just what you're seeing, so please stop explaining. Don't tell me 'cause it hurts. No, no, don't speak. I know what you're thinking, and I don't need your reasons. Don't tell me 'cause it hurts. Don't tell me 'cause it hurts. I know what you're seeing, so please stop explaining. Don't speak, don't speak, don't speak. Oh, I know what you're thinking, and I don't need your reasons. I know you could, I know you could, I know you real good. Oh, la 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 la, la 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 la. Don't, darling, hush, hush, darling, hush, hush, don't tell me 'cause it hurts. Hush, hush, darling, hush, hush, darling, hush, hush, don't tell me 'cause it hurts. Oh, hush, hush, darling, hush, hush, darling.
Road between Dublin and Belfast, the one a little bit further away, the new motorway between the two capital cities, and as you can see it is incredibly busy, that road. The bilateral trade between Northern Ireland and the Republic tops a staggering £1 billion a week. That's a hard figure to get your head around, really. It's important to remember that the Republic of Ireland imports 30% of its importing goods from the United Kingdom, things like food and fashion. So there are really big issues at stake here, and the two sides are deeply divided on just what would happen to this border. It is 310 miles long, and there are multiple crossing points. It would be a major exercise to put in place some sort of customs and excise. The Leave campaign say that won't be necessary. There's always been this informal arrangement between the north and the south of Ireland. But the Remain campaign say you can't have it both ways. You can't say you're opting out of the EU to take control of the border, but do nothing about this border here. And then, of course, there is the wider sovereignty issue. Trust me, if the United Kingdom votes to leave the European Union tomorrow, Republicans will demand a referendum on removing this border altogether, on Northern Ireland leaving the United Kingdom, quicker than the SNP will demand another referendum on Scottish independence. It's been about a week since we had any polls here. The last one was indicating a sort of 52% poll in favour of Remain, something like 38 opting to leave the European Union, but that leaves 10% of the population in Northern Ireland still undecided. It may be the smallest part of the UK, but there are big issues at stake here, and that's why we've had all of the big hitters, from the Prime Minister to his two immediate predecessors, Tony Blair and Sir John Major, and even the Chancellor of the Exchequer, all have been campaigning in Northern Ireland.